Hello everyone, and welcome to Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the creative, artistic, interesting side of the spectrum, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where we are currently experiencing something that approximates summer. We have sun, we have blue skies. Everyone is outside, but for me it's the perfect day to play games and then come online and talk about them. And today it's kind of a special game. I picked the games like kind of carefully. I as some of you may know, the scattershot nature of the show is somewhat to do with the fact that I didn't play for about 10 years seriously any kind of games at all. I had to sell all my consoles and pretty much everything I own when I moved out to Iceland just to raise cash and downsize. But over the last year or so I found myself with some much needed time for relaxation and hobbies and doing fun things, so I've reacquainted myself with gaming, and this podcast is my own kind of journey through trawling game of the year lists and listening to great podcasts like The Short Game, Time Played, 3HR, Out of the Sandbox, to name just a few, and picking up games that seem intriguing or interesting in some way, or sometimes that just happen to be on sale. So you get the odd kind of game that seems a little bit out of step with the general vibe of the podcast, like Mad Max. It's not a particularly gaming in the wild kind of game, but it ended up in the show anyway, and deservedly so. But this particular episode is dedicated to a game that could have been made for this show. It's a really artistic game. It is The Last Guardian. It's hard to say where this game sits in terms of whether it's indie or first party. It was produced with a lot of help from Sony, but by a very small team led by Fumito Ueda, the guy who directed Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. He made those games as part of Team Ico. Later that team it splintered somewhat, but some of them stayed together. It became Gen Design. Gen Design, from what I have been able to pick up, was operating inside Sony for a while. But then due to the kind of development hell issues that surrounded this game during its 9-year development period, Ueda ended up leaving Sony, acting as a creative consultant, and then somehow they all patched it together and helped it across the finish line. And that troubled process probably goes a little way to explaining why this game, despite being kind of, well, you could describe it as a cult classic. Shadow of the Colossus is perhaps more of a flat-out hit, more well-known, more well-regarded, and is in some ways a more well-rounded and realized game, at least in its remastered PS4 form. The Last Guardian was begun on PS2 and then moved to PS3. Ueda was apparently happy with the PS3 version, but a whole other team, Santa Monica Studios, I believe, were brought in to try and optimize the game's performance, and ultimately it was moved to PS4. So this game went through a lot of trouble on its way to reaching us, but I'm very happy that it did. It's the story of an unnamed boy and a creature called Trico. And Trico is a giant sort of crossover beast that is part cat, but has kind of bird-like claws and wings. But it has a head that looks more like the head of a raccoon or a dog, and it's feathered. So it's like a mythical beast that you could compare to a chimera or a griffin, but bigger. It's a made-up mythical beast. The game actually starts with the kind of diagrams of mythical beasts like unicorn, Pegasus, dragon, and Trico. And we begin the game at the bottom of an area that we come to know as the Valley. It's a huge kind of ruined, abandoned, crumbling city that exists in a kind of it's not really a valley. It looks more like a kind of a hollowed out tree trunk, but it's huge, vertical, extremely vertical. And you start at the very bottom in a cave. Trico at this point is chained up, unfriendly, deeply unfriendly, and the boy is terrified of the creature. And in the first few moments, we realise that we can't get out of this space that we're in, and so the puzzling aspect of the game begins. Trico has abilities that the boy does not. The boy has abilities that Trico does not. So you feed Trico a little, and you pet Trico a little, and he's still very suspicious of you. But using the boy's ability to slip through small spaces, trigger switches to open doors, and to kind of spot solutions to moving through and escaping from this environment. And then Trico is able to leap great distances and kind of brute force situations and leap up with his front paws onto tall ledges. And you can then climb onto Trico, grip his feathers, climb up Trico onto his head, and then get to places that you couldn't get otherwise. And so the relationship between the boy and Trico begins, and that is the central premise of the game. It's a journey through a kind of a beautiful environment made by two beings that come to trust each other over time. And so that central bond is beautiful, noteworthy, and the core of this game. It's not... I'm going to try and do this spoiler-free, because you could talk about this game for a long time without even mentioning plot. There is a good plot. It's largely wordless, but occasionally you'll get an older male narrator who'll fill you in with just a couple of lines here and there. And it's clearly the voice of the boy as an older man telling the story of this ascent through the valley with this creature. And that bond develops in a really interesting, dynamic way. At first, Trico is kind of very independent, clearly a little scared by this situation. He's chained when you originally find him, and you have to set him free to get through the first area. But then you have to start problem solving together. And at first you have no control over Trico, and you never have real control over Trico. Trico is a fantastic AI that behaves in a way that makes you believe fully that this is a wild creature with a mind of its own, with instincts of its own. And you have to kind of, over time, figure some stuff out about that. It's never fully spelled out in the control scheme, but as a player, if you mount Trico, climb onto his back, hold down R1, and push the stick in a direction, the boy will attempt to direct Trico to move in that direction. Sometimes Trico does, sometimes Trico has no interest. If you hold down R1 and hit triangle, Trico will be encouraged to look up, whether to set his paws on a high ledge or to jump. Again, it's a process. You have to sometimes encourage Trico for quite a while to do these things. If you hold down R1 and hit X, you can encourage Trico to look down or to stamp. And these controls aren't spelled out. I actually found out about some of this stuff when I got stuck, and I dipped into a guide to get through a particularly problematic passage of play, of which there are a few, and noticed in the notes that came with this particular guide that these commands were spelled out. There are other commands and actions that I also found out about in a similar way that are never spelled out in the game. For example, occasionally you will come across these kind of hollow suits of armor that attempt to catch the boy. Trico can destroy them very easily with a swipe of the paw. They sometimes come with spears and try and spike Trico. If they do, you can pull spears out of him. But I didn't find out until very late in the game that when Trico swipes down a suit of armor and it's lying prone on the ground, the boy can pull the head off the armor and destroy it. And I didn't know that. And there are times in this game where, for example, Trico is kind of swiping under a door and you're being beset on the other side by suits of armor, and you have to operate a switch to let Trico in and fuck them up. And Trico can swipe them down. He can reach under the door and swipe them. And if I had known that I could pull the heads off prone suits of armor, it would have really helped me through some quite hairy gameplay situations. So the game doesn't do a great job of signposting your abilities, your range of actions. There was another puzzle I remember where there are 3 holes, and you can tempt Trico to stick his head into each one of them. And one of them has some vines growing, but there are vines growing everywhere in this ruined city. It's nothing special. It looks like part of the scenery. But I got really stuck. I asked my friend Kieran, who's been playing the game alongside me, how to get through this. He played the game over a much longer period, took loads of breaks, came back to it fresh, which probably was a good way to play it. I played it across the course of a week. It's a game, if you take regular breaks, perhaps the frustration will be lessened. But he told me that you can leap onto Trico's back and you can jump onto the vines. But the game never tells you that. The game never gives you that first inkling that you can interact with the scenery in that way to solve that puzzle. You could call it lateral thinking, I guess, and problem solving, but I think that good game design, in my opinion, will introduce you to elements of that type. So if you come to a puzzle that needs you to pull the head off something, or a puzzle that needs you to climb vines, or a puzzle that needs you to encourage Trico to act in a certain way, the game should have in some way prepared you for that, like primed you on the controls that are available to you. Otherwise, you're left a little lost. I'm pretty sure that plenty of people played through this game without ever utilizing some of the controls, and found some puzzles and scenarios much more difficult than they needed to be. As a result, you could look at this as a choice from the director. I've read a little bit about the director's intentions, and I mean, even on the wiki page for the game, there's a quote from him where he says the long development period meant that he had to keep it in mind that this game was for new players and not for people that had played it a million times in testing over a period of years. But even though he has awareness of that, Ueda, it seems that to me that some things went either ill-judged in deciding to omit introductions to game mechanics, or went under the by the wayside in the fact that they just didn't. So I would say be prepared if you're going to play this game that some puzzle solutions may be unapparent. The solutions are maybe a little bit out of your reach. I would say that this is a game that I would absolutely recommend using a guide for. If you get stuck, just to keep the gameplay moving, because the narrative and the thrust of the game are so enjoyable that being held up for hours, cooped up in a small room with a puzzle, is going to suck the enjoyment out of it for you. And there is a lot of enjoyment to be had. Trico is one of my favourite video game creations of all time, and that's saying a lot. In the past, I've said that I'm a huge fan of Aloy in Horizon Zero Dawn. I think that her movement and her personality, physicality, her interaction with the environment and the dialogue choices that you get create like a kind of believable, rounded, enjoyable character. And as I played that game, I almost felt like I was doing it in collaboration with Aloy. She'll say, hey, look, and kind of point things out in the environment. You feel like you're on a journey with her. When she looks down, you know that she's looking at something and it directs your attention. So it feels like a kind of really amazing connection between player and their avatar in the game. And Trico is incredibly believable. I found this really interesting. The name of the creature Trico in Japanese kanji is pronounced Toriko, which can be taken to mean prisoner or baby bird. Baby bird would be Torinoko, or a portmanteau of bird and cat, which would be Toriniko. So it's like an interesting wordplay, even the name of the beast. The Western pronunciation has been Trico, but during the game, the boy, when he calls to Trico, says Toriko, in a really cute way, and you can call for Trico, and he'll generally head in your direction. If you failed to get him through a corridor, you can just walk yourself and call him. But Trico kind of, when you come into a new space, like if it's open, there are relatively few open spaces in the game, but when you first enter one, Trico will run like a dog that's been let out of the house. If you're in a really narrow, tight space, Trico will get nervous and like his ears will twitch, and he has to crouch and squeeze through spaces in a similar way that you might, a really similar way to a cat. Trico also stretches after strenuous passages of play like a cat, this kind of cat yoga. Paws down and kind of real stretch of the back. Trico, like in some points, there's a puddle of water and he'll roll in it joyfully. Other times he's scared of water. There are times when he has to sort of scramble up really unstable structures. During combat, Trico kind of jumps and sort of puts his head back and is really kind of bird-like and kind of pecks down at them. Swipes warriors away, and then after combat, because Trico doesn't like to fight but is often called to in the game, Trico will freak out after a fight and just jump up and down and kind of be really apparently in a state of kind of anxiety and discomfort and after a combat, and so you have to climb onto Trico and scratch his head to calm him down. Also, if you get really stuck in a puzzle, Trico will wander around for a while and then often express his own curiosity by finding the way forward himself, even if as the boy you haven't been able to do so. And so the bond between boy and Trico and this incredibly believable Trico creature grows throughout the game. The commands, Trico starts to trust you and listen to you more as the game progresses. And so you start to feel more like you're working together. And it's a beautiful central gameplay relationship. It's compelling and it really fills you with warmth when it's at its best. And those are some of my favourite passages of play. It's when Trico and the boy are working together and using their strengths, their individual strengths, to progress through the game. Trico is at times alarmed by these stained glass eyes that hang like Trico repellents. He'll just stop and stare at them, and kind of you have to sort of scramble forward, find your way to wherever it's hanging or wherever it is, and kind of trash it, roll it, drop it, smash it, so that Trico can move forward. At times when you manage to actually get upwards through this vertical valley, in inverted commas, there are times when there is no way forward, seemingly, but if you hop onto Trico's back, he'll identify like a outcrop of rock, and outcropping, and he'll pounce up there with you on his back, and then pounce again. And some of these moments when you're seemingly stuck, but then Trico finds the way forward and bounds, like it feels huge when he moves. Like he'll crouch down and like wiggle his little wings and kind of bob his head, and then leap. And when he does so, it feels vast. It feels like you feel the weight of the creature, and he'll crash onto the top of like a pillar. And sometimes these stone pillars, like they're just broken pillars that litter the city, the ruined city. And Trico will stand on there like a cat on a fence post, look around, and then find the next one. Sometimes when Trico kind of bounds 6-7 times in a row, and you're making this really fast progress, it feels amazing. So that's when the game is at its best. When the game is at its worst, there's a reason I think that The Last Guardian is not considered in the same bracket as Shadow of the Colossus, which is considered by many to be just a straight up contemporary classic. Last Guardian is more of a cult game. Didn't quite get the same rapturous critical acclaim. It got a mixed critical response, although I think it's around the 8 mark on Metacritic, but few reviews of The Last Guardian came without qualified praise. Common complaints that I fully agree with are that the camera is terrible. So when you're moving through claustrophobic spaces with a huge beast with you in third person, if you turn and Trico's kind of close to you, the camera will go behind or through Trico, and you'll just get a screen full of feathers. Can't see shit. In some tight spaces, the camera doesn't seem to know what to do with walls, and so it'll kind of bounce and hover, and you can't really see where you're going or what you're doing. Some points where it's like they've almost got it right. Say there's a low doorway, and if you try and move through it as Trico's trying to move through it, the camera knows that it should be on one side or the other. But if you're trying to squeeze through and Trico's in the way, the camera cannot be on one side or the other, can't move through, and so just becomes trapped and starts freaking out. And so throughout the game, your immersion is broken by noticing the camera, and rather than controlling the boy, you're trying to maneuver him to get the camera to look where you need it to look, so you can see what you're doing, which is really far from ideal. Another common criticism of the game is Trico is not always cooperative. So you can come into a space, you can see the solution to a puzzle, and then it can take you a really long time to just get it done, to execute that solution. And you have to encourage Trico to perhaps jump up to a high space or squeeze through something. And he won't do it. And sometimes it seems good and realistic, like Trico is kind of a wild creature. He's not just going to obey your commands, he's doing his own thing, and so you have to kind of lead him there. Perhaps you have to tempt him with food. Perhaps you have to get on his back and point in that direction multiple times to try and get him interested in what you're trying to accomplish. But sometimes it seems like Trico gets a little stuck, and you end up having to do the same command kind of 10 times, and in the end you'll get through, but it's just because Trico had to position himself in order for the animation to take place, for you to progress. Now, I'm showing a little bit of video now for those who are watching on YouTube of this happening, of me trying to encourage Trico to jump through a hole, and Trico just not doing it for 5 minutes of trying to persuade the creature to do something. And whether or not you buy into that as a gameplay idea, to some degree I think will define whether or not you buy into the game. You have to enjoy trying to get Trico to do stuff if you're going to enjoy the game, and you have to be willing to deal with the fact that the boy is he's quite heavily animated in a similar way to Prince of Persia and Another World. Those are two games that I thought of a lot in the way that his flat colours are. His outfit looks a little bit like the original Prince of Persia. And in those games, if you remember, if you've played them, you can hit left, but then if you're running right, you hit left, and then the character has to slow down, skid, turn, and that might be like a kind of a 1 or 2 second animation before you can put in another input. And the boy is a little like that. He's a heavily animated character. It's not always super responsive. And interestingly, on the wiki page, it also said that Another World and Prince of Persia were formative influences for Fumito Ueda. So this is perhaps something that he's comfortable with. And maybe that's just a design choice, but I think for some players it will be frustrating. So yeah, there are downsides to this game, as well as the many upsides. It's a mixed bag. You have to overcome some fairly frustrating situations to get to the end. It's about a 12 to 15 hour game. And I say that it's absolutely worth playing, despite the criticism that I've laid out in this show. I would say play it with a guide alongside you, and don't be afraid to use it, or with a friend on call on Facebook chat to help you through the harder parts. It's a great game. That the relationship that you have with Trico, and just the monumental achievement of creating this creature that will explore and express its own personality, behave in a completely naturalistic way, and not seem like a video game creation, but rather a believable creature, is something that I haven't really experienced in any other game, and for that alone, I recommend this game. Interestingly, Fumito Ueda is working on a new project, which has found full funding from Epic Games as of March 2020. It's been 4 years since The Last Guardian, and I'm sure he's been working away. So from the director of Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, both of which are on PS Now, by the way, so you can play them for free if you're on PS Now, and The Last Guardian, which seems like the kind of perfect PS Plus or PS Now game, especially considering Ueda's relationship with Sony. But I think it's not on there now, so you have to buy it. I actually bought a physical copy of it for £15 or something. There is another game in this series coming. He is an auteur. These games are all really original, really creative, fascinating, and all flawed. But with the correct resources and the correct team and the experience gained from these games, I'm really excited for whatever Fumito Ueda comes up with next. It's also worth mentioning that the music of this game was written by Takeshi Furukawa and played by the London Symphony Orchestra. It's an incredibly lush soundtrack that swells beautifully at moments of excitement in combat or moments of emerging into new environments. It's an audiovisual spectacle, it's an original gameplay concept, and it's a game that cultivates, that provoked in me a lot of wonder, moments of real wonder, and that's something that I think elevates a game. So despite even the flaws of the game, the moments of wonder elevate it to heights that some games, even more well-rounded and fully formed games, never reach. So I recommend this with qualified praise, but you can probably tell that I love it. That's The Last Guardian. So that was The Last Guardian. I'm going to now talk about the plot a little. So I thought I'd give a little spoiler warning. If you are going to play the game yourself, maybe you don't want to hear about the plot, and so this is your opportunity to drop out of the show. Maybe come back later. So from now on, this is your chance to stop listening. And if you're stopping listening now, you can find me online at Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as Gaming in the Wild. I like a lot Twitch streaming the games that I talk about on the show. So if you're interested in coming live in the chat, seeing me play through some of the game and taking part in that, and coming along for the ride, I'm always happy to have people with me. I tweet lots about games that I'm playing. I tweet like bits of video, screenshots, recommendations, and just lots of chit chat about games. So I'm really happy to have a good, strong community around the show. And there is also a Discord, a Gaming in the Wild Discord, and if you're interested in that, then just drop me a message on one of those social media platforms, and I'll get an invite to you. And with that said, let's talk about the plot of The Last Guardian. So it's initially a big mystery what's actually happening in this game. It's not clear how you arrived. It's not clear what Trico is doing chained up in this valley. It's not clear what the valley is. The boy does say he wants to get home to his village, so he's clearly been kidnapped. And you're not sure if Trico is hostile at first. First, Trico is like hostile, and the boy seems to have some knowledge that Tricos are to be feared. And as you progress through the game, the narrator starts to tell you more via flashback sequences. So there is a point in the game, it's a really cool plot reveal, when through flashback we see Trico coming to the village. He very quietly, because he can fly in the flashback, he can't fly, his wings aren't, like maybe he's too damaged, maybe he's too tired, maybe he's too weak, but Trico in the game can't fly. And so in this flashback we see Trico fly up to the village and land very lightly like a woodpecker or like a hummingbird on the side of a dormitory building, and he very quietly puts his head through the window. He identifies the child, the boy, the avatar through which you play the game, and he swallows him. He knocks something over, the village is alerted, and he flees. Also during this flashback, Trico comes to the valley and through some disaster falls. He falls, he crashes through the ceilings, he ends up falling all the way down into the base of the valley, where these suits of armor that we encounter throughout the game pick him up, carry him, and chain him up, and leave the boy there, presumably to be eaten or whatever. Later in the game again, we discover that there is not just one Trico, but there are many. We discover that the other Tricos wear armor, and Trico himself, his eyes flash different colors, like they flash white when he's interested in something, they flash green, they flash purple when combat is coming or he feels aggressive. And all of the other Tricos just have purple eyes all the time. They're angry, combative, aggressive Tricos. And we discover that the Master of the Valley, a ball of energy that resides at the very top of the white tower that is the center of the valley, is mind controlling the Tricos to go and kidnap children, which are then kind of expelled from the mouth of the Trico into the system of the city, and presumably turned into Trico food in barrels and energy that runs the suits of armor, that fuels the Master of the Valley, and that in turn feeds the Tricos. And so we discover that the Tricos are being mind controlled by this sinister energy. And at the very end of the game, we, through a kind of a really cool action sequence, destroy the Master of the Valley using some of Trico's powers. And the plot is super. It's important to the game that the story is so compelling. Some games like this, it wouldn't have mattered so much. Like, the joy of the game would have come from the puzzling and from the characters, the bond of the main characters. But with the frustration that comes along with the flawed gameplay and game design of The Last Guardian, the story becomes an essential part of what drives you on. And at points in the game, like, I always mentally rate games like out of 10. At points in the game, I was like, this is a 10 out of 10 game. At other points in the game, as I got more frustrated with it, I was like, shit, this is almost broken sometimes. It's just like a 6 out of 10. I messaged my friend Kieran at one point and said, I think this is the best 6 out of 10 game I've ever played. But he encouraged me to continue playing, which I always was going to do. But it's good to hear that someone has come out the other side of the game and come to a positive enjoyment with the game. And I have to say that by the time you get to the end, by the time the nature of the Trico is revealed, the nature of the valley is revealed, the system of energy that runs this place, and the kind of dysfunctional, evil force that runs the place is revealed, and the final outcome where Trico delivers the wounded boy, the mortally wounded boy, back to the village, where Tricos are absolutely not welcome, and he takes the boy back, he gives him back, and the guards of the village come out with spears, and the boy has to command his Trico to leave for his own safety. And so one last time in the game, he utters the words that tell Trico to move. You've been using them to spur him on throughout the game. And at the last moment, the boy is weak and tired, and he's being held by a villager. And he utters the words, and Trico leaves. And it's like this sad ending of the central bond between boy and beast cannot be maintained. And the story ends with them being apart, which is kind of a sad ending. But honestly, considering all of the different directions the story could have gone, there are times at which you think Trico is going to be killed, because Trico seems to be whilst out of the mind control, and that's part of what the kid does. The kid trashes and helps Trico to circumvent the means by which all of the other Tricos are being mind controlled to be evil. And so I think the Last Guardian is perhaps the child rather than the Trico. But considering all of the outcomes, there are 3 times in the game where it seems like Trico might be dead. One where the first time he's attacked by another Trico, he gets his ass handed to him, and only survives barely, and through your intervention of using environmental tools like dropping a very heavy weight onto the other Trico to crush it, basically, and make it retreat. You think Trico is going to die at the end. He's beset by a pack of other Tricos that are all very aggressive, purple-eyed, armoured, and they lay into him, they pile onto him. And as the boy, you have to destroy the Master of the Valley to make that stop. And it seems like I thought Trico was going to be dead after that. He's been mauled, thoroughly mauled by other hostile Tricos. But again and again, Trico kind of crawls back from the brink. There are times at which the boy seems dead, like he's fallen a great height, and Trico picks him up at one point and kind of lifts him, tries to set him down on his feet, doesn't seem to understand. He ends up dipping the boy in some water to wake him up, and then like nuzzles him. It's absolutely beautiful. But throughout the game, you're not sure if both characters will make it to the end. And a thought that occurred to me is that Fumito Ueda, perhaps after making Shadow of the Colossus, I read an interesting thing that he was very surprised that in Shadow of the Colossus the players felt more of a bond between player and horse than between player and Colossi, and he'd intended for an emotional connection with these Colossi that you have to kill. And so he's clearly had an interest in creating these emotional bonds. And in this game, all of the effort has gone into the Colossus being a friendly Colossus and the player working with them and growing to love them, care for them, treasure them. And it's very effective in that regard. And so the fact that both Boy and Trico are allowed to live at the end feels like a huge gift and a huge result. A little like at the end of Last of Us 2, I was certain that Joel and Ellie not both of them would survive the story. And so it felt like a gift at the end, that despite all of the trouble and all of the opportunities for one or the other character to be killed off for dramatic purposes, we were allowed to keep them both. And so that's the story. It's like at moments during this game I was eye-rolling, I was kind of tired and not excited to continue, but the story does compel you to continue. And the ending, the payoff at the ending is absolutely worth the trouble of navigating the game's more frustrating and difficult moments. You end up climbing the White Tower. The final scene plays out on the top of the White Tower, the highest point in the valley. And you look down, you see all of the viaducts, columns, towers, this kind of Gaudi, I think you say it Gaudi, like the Spanish architect. These kind of Gaudi cathedrals that you've scaled, that Trico has clambered up, that you've helped him navigate through doors, corridors, tight spaces, through natural cliffside caves. You've successfully navigated all the way to the very top. And when you emerge on the top, there's beautiful sunlight that catches Trico's feathers. And Trico finally takes flight. And it's a moment that my jaw dropped open. I got goosebumps. It's absolute magic. And what more can you ask for from a game? Moments of magic, moments that will stay with you. Despite its flaws, The Last Guardian manages to deliver on the promise of that. And so there we go. That's The Last Guardian. That's my review. If I had to give it, I don't know what I would rate it ultimately. Depending on the player, it could be 4, a 6, an 8, 10. I don't know. Parts of it deserve any of those marks. For me, its status as a cult classic is deserved. With a few alterations, I think this game could be considered an all-time great. The central bond and the emotional resonance of the story and the art design and creature design, voice acting, the environment, puzzles when they're at their best, when everything's working the way it should, this game is utterly fantastic. I would love to see a PS5 remaster that ironed out some of the issues that stopped this game from being a straight 10 out of 10. But given the 9-year cycle, the trouble, development hell of making this game happen, it seems unlikely. So it is what it is. I hear that it performs a little better on a PS4 Pro. I played it on a PS4 Slim. When Trico is fully doing his thing, there is frame rate drops, but that doesn't affect gameplay. It's usually at times when he's leaping from place to place. It didn't affect my enjoyment of the game. It's more the little technical things. So there we go. That's The Last Guardian. If you've played it, come chat with me on Twitter. If you'd like to see me play it, come follow me on Twitch. I've also played Firewatch recently, finished that game. I've been considering making a show that covers both games, but there's so much to say about The Last Guardian. I think this will end up being 40 minutes just on that game. So perhaps the next episode will be about Firewatch, and might come quite quickly off the back of this one. So thanks for listening. This has been Gaming in the Wild. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye bye.